Jerry Daykin is Senior Media Director EMEA for pharmaceuticals giant GSK. He says of the roughly £500 million spent on media across EMEA each year, less than 20% was spent on digital. In some markets, that figure dropped as low as 10%, but now digital media takes a 40% cut of brand spend. And of course, driving digital transformation in any business, let alone one the size of GSK, is a mammoth task. Success all comes down to 6 key focus points. But what are they? So let's find out. Please welcome Jerry Daykin.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be joining you guys this morning. I'm quite jealous of the agenda you have ahead of you as well. It sounds like some really fantastic topics to talk about today. And yeah, exactly has been set up there. I joined GSK around 3 years ago. It's actually the consumer healthcare part of GSK. So yes, we have a sort of really large pharmaceutical team, but I work on brands like Sensodyne, Advil, Panadol, Voltarol, trying to build these brands with humanity, trying to build brands that really serve everyday consumers. And I was brought on 3 years ago really to face into the fact that we were a little bit behind in terms of where we needed to be in terms of digital, in terms of adapting our approach to marketing, in terms of catching up with consumers. And I wanted to talk you through a little bit of that today. So let me get the slides up somehow.
Fantastic. So we'll do that for you, Jerry. There you go. Here are the slides up. Just to let everybody know, I'll be back to put any questions you've got to Jerry at the end of this. But in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, Jerry Daykin. Over to you, sir.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I think we heard in the introduction there that we have been on this journey from spending less than 20% of our media budgets on digital to over 40%. I'm always slightly hesitant to share that stat because I absolutely don't believe that kind of percentage of media spent on digital is the real best measure of how digital, how agile, how adaptive a company is. But it's often the easiest one to get to, and I think it does show the kind of the depth of the change we needed to drive. I think one thing that we all know for sure is kind of the world around us is changing. There are new digital opportunities, that there are new ways of connecting, of ordering things, of staying in touch with one another. I think over the last 24 hours, many of Facebook's platforms went down, and I think that put into the sharp contrast just how much we rely on some of those technologies just to talk to our friends, to our families, to arrange things, to get things done. So we know that the world around us is changing. We know that the consumer is changing. And as marketers, it's quite literally our jobs to reflect that. There's no industry more so than marketing, where it's our job to understand consumers, understand what sort of is going through their heads, understand how they're acting and what they're doing, and then to try and reflect that back in what we do. And that's really what our focus of our digital transformation was, not trying to increase our digital spends for the sake of it, but really trying to understand where consumers were, what the opportunity was to map to them, how we needed to act differently. It's not always about spending more. Sometimes it's about spending differently and embracing some of these challenges. And the reason we ultimately do that is to grow our business. That's probably what many of you guys are trying to do with your own businesses. It's rare to find a business that doesn't want to grow. And we just knew that the growth opportunities came from new consumers, from finding different ways of engaging with consumers, and through all this. And that's why we have, over the last 2-3 years, driven a really substantial change. I think for people who had been in my company 2-3 years ago, it would be somewhat unrecognizable now. And so we sort of took as we sort of move into our next 3-year process, we took a little stopgap and said, well, how have we done it? What have we actually driven over that time? And the first P I want to touch on is people. And I think it's sort of a super obvious thing to say, but marketing is a people game. And I have been talking about the consumers and the people we're trying to talk to. But here I really start to mean our people, our teams, the people who work for you. And I think in marketing, when we start talking about, or wider in business, when we talk about trying to drive sort of digital transformation, trying to drive change, we often start talking about technology. We start talking about targeting and data and innovative new ways of doing things. But I think the thing we really need to remember is that behind all of that, at a keyboard or making things happen or making decisions, are always people. And people, if we're realistic and we look across kind of where we were 3-4 years ago, the biggest barrier wasn't that we didn't know what we could do. It wasn't that we didn't have the technology. It's that people were sometimes being the barrier. And people can be both the biggest barrier to change and also the biggest accelerator. if you get a group of people behind you, if you get people running in the same direction as you, you'll find doors open, things are suddenly possible, things that used to be blockers aren't anymore. And in particular, I work across a very complex business across, over 50 different markets, over 100 markets by some measures. And so for us, it's really about how do you get remote people you can't tap on the shoulder, people who you really need to bring along with you. And when I joined, I have a team of almost a dozen media people embedded in some of those different business units in those markets. And the reality was they were very isolated. They were individual media marketing experts sat in their markets, doing their own thing, keeping their heads down. I think the greatest thing I've seen happen in my business, and I've seen it happen in many multinational businesses, is when you turn a group of isolated experts into a real positive network, working closely together, supporting one another, not afraid to ask the dumb or the hard questions of one another. And that's really the transformation we've done. It's really a transformation of getting that team talking to each other, challenging each other, and forming that community. But it's a wake-up call, because I think all too often when we start talking about things like digital transformation, you think, what consultant, what tech partner, what platform can I get in? And actually, often you have the people who can drive that transformation right in front of you. Perhaps they need some capability building, perhaps they just need some empowerment, perhaps they just need to be told that, what they want to do is the right thing. But often you're looking at, exactly the right way to drive this transformation in front of you. Now, next to the people you have in your own team are absolutely the partners that you have alongside you, the partners that you perhaps spar with, that you perhaps fight with, that you perhaps train with and get stronger together with. And I think partnerships are a really powerful way of accelerating our own businesses by drawing on knowledge, capabilities, expertise, or just resource that other businesses can bring to us. For us, that started, in my team, I've said I have a small internal team of a dozen or so people. With our media agency partnership, the publicist platform GSK, we actually have over 300 people working on our team there. That's a huge extended community of people to drive this change for us. And it was a conscious decision for us to have one consistent partner across the region. Some companies have different approaches with multiple media agencies and multiple agency partners. But for us, having that consistent partner meant they were a sort of a network, a backbone, helping us drive some of these changes, making sure that we didn't have to always go one by one to make sweeping changes across our business. We could ask them through their network, through some of the centralized ways of working and buying that we set up. So really thinking about your partners, not just as kind of vendors, not just as people you have to write a check to and then give you a service, but a two-way partnership. And for us, we've had really positive relationships as well with the likes of Google and Facebook. Love them or hate them, we found them to be really fantastic partners. They're sort of an unavoidable part of the marketing mix. So rather than kind of battling against them, we've worked with them, worked to sort of see how can we get better at using their platforms, but also learn from their businesses, learn from their processes, learn from their ways of working and adapt that thinking to our own. And we also see really interesting partnerships outside of that, smaller media owners. And we've worked in particular with a range of diverse media owners, for instance, here in the UK, partnering with Gay Times on some of our brands to help us not just understand the average consumer's shifts, but really to understand some of the diverse audiences we serve. What are some of the differences, some of the nuances emerging in those people, audiences that we couldn't hope as a business to understand as well as our partners do. And so really, it's again, more people, but people and partners have been the underpinning of this. Now, again, when you talk about digital transformation, the selling points tend to be quite glamorous, AI, VR, automation, huge efficiencies, transformative new experiences, really interesting, shiny new digital objects that are out there. And it's rare that you start talking about the sexy side of sort of digital transformation in terms of the processes you need to bring in. But like most things in life, digital is bringing lots and lots of opportunities, but it also brings lots of noise, lots of confusion, lots of opportunities to waste money and do the wrong things, lots of distractions from, marketing, business, finance. We're all very busy people. Digital can bring with it huge amounts of distractions and complications that we don't know what to do with. And so I was surprised when I joined, to be honest, that for quite a big, substantial company like GSK, we didn't have really consistent global or even regional processes around some of our marketing, some of our media approach. I think it's because we embrace the sort of the locality, the nuance, that markets wanted to do things their own way, that there is certainly a richness that comes from thinking local first. But ultimately, we saw that there's loads of really clear things that we could do better and more consistent with process. So we put a lot of work into kind of our media product to make sure we have more consistent ways of briefing, more consistent analytical approaches. We rolled out some processes called connections planning and ecosystems, which is really about stopping just visualizing our media and marketing as kind of lines that we as marketers might see it, but flipping it on its head to say, you know, what does it look like from a consumer perspective? What is the consumer journey through all this? And where are we showing up or not showing up from them? Having processes that really force you to look at things not from what you'd like to do, but what from the consumer is seeing of you has been really helpful for us. I think we've also found that, you know, as marketers, one of our most challenging but important engagements is always with the kind of the financial community within our business. You know, finance holds the purse strings, and quite rightly, it's their job to hold them quite tightly, to be careful what money they give out. And, you know, they can't be seen just to write huge checks for sort of crazy digital ideas. And so we've worked a lot in terms of building up a currency in how we speak and communicate to finance, introducing new analytical approaches, an approach called sufficiency, which is really a deep and analytical look at how much we should spend, not just in total, but across this consumer journey, so that the conversations we have with finance, with our senior leadership, with our market GMs, isn't just about, you know, marketing and media wanting to spend more money for the sake of it. It's showing the growth ambition we have, the process we've been through, how we've validated that. And that's really become part of something we call a repeatable growth model, which is sort of a simple process to analyze where we are in a market, to analyze where the audience growth opportunities are, and to really build a kind of business grounded story around that. So again, it's driving a digital transformation, but putting process and putting frameworks around it that means the rest of the business takes us truly seriously. I think you can't do any of this without passion, and you'll excuse the visual. One of my passions outside of work is randomly the Eurovision Song Contest, and you can't get much more passionate than the winner of that. But I actually think that passion is sometimes an overlooked concept in terms of trying to drive this. When you're trying to ask your teams to move out of their comfort zone, when you're trying to introduce new ways of doing things, and yes, we try and simplify a lot of things, but there's no doubt that digital has created more work, more questions, more challenges for our teams. And one of the biggest barriers you can face to that is sort of apathy or inertia, and people just, you know, kind of wanting things to stay the way they are. And, you know, things are working, things are okay. I get that what you're saying might be slightly better, but I've got a lot of other things on my plate. And we found that one of the biggest ways of cracking that is really passion. Now, how do you inject passion into a business is a slightly tough question. It helps to have leaders who are genuinely and truly passionate about this, about, you know, if you can't tell, I am genuinely passionate about making better marketing, about more effective marketing, but also marketing that is better for the world, more inclusive, funding more of the right things. And we've tried to inject that and make that really, really visible, to make sure that, you know, the directives and the messages coming down to our business aren't just sort of emails and spreadsheet requests, but we create lots of forums where it's been possible to share some of that passion, and also not just top down, to really encourage some of our brand teams when they've done great things, when they've done really forward-thinking things, to empower them to share that, to lead that. And so many of the great achievements we've run across the region have come from the bottom up. But we've also made a really conscious decision as a business to be a bit more vocal externally, because you know, it can seem like a sort of a, you know, you're showing off to start sharing some of your story externally, to brag about what you're doing, to share some of the journey we've been on. But actually, we see it as part of making our teams proud and making our teams want to do more. It's, you know, one of the reasons I'm here today. But also, we've chosen other topics to be really passionate and vocal about. For instance, we're really trying to take a lead, as I've alluded to, in this topic of diversity and representation in marketing, in the important opportunity for our brands to reach and represent a more diverse audience, but also to help that audience, to support that audience through positive representation, through funding, through things that genuinely push for a better society. And that's a lofty aim for marketing, but it's something we absolutely believe we can do, especially as we really think about building brands with humanity. And we've actually been co-chairing the World Federation of Advertisers Diversity Task Force as just sort of one example of how we're trying to take that passion and show our people that we really care this stuff, and our business can make a huge difference internally and externally. Coming towards the last couple of P's, I think we talked a lot about getting the basics right, and actually in digital, I think one of the things that you must make sure you don't jump straight to is the sexy, the new, the shiny. There's loads of really well proven, perhaps less glamorous stuff that we know works in digital. We've adopted golden rules on key platforms like Google and Facebook that work time and time again, and sometimes our markets murmur, our media plans, our marketing plans can look slightly cookie cutter. We have very similar plans across some of our brands in different markets and different situations. But if you have principles that work, if you know what drives results for your business, you don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. You can repeat them. So focus your efforts on scaling things that you know that work, either with your own best practice or tapping into some of your partner's best practice, agency's best practice. We know TV works, we know Facebook works, we know YouTube works. Well, Facebook works most of the time when it's not down. But we also know that there are new things coming, and it is hard to predict what the next big thing could be. It's hard to know some of the new opportunities that come up. The industry's been shouting about data and targeting and those kind of pieces for a number of years now. You really do need to test those things, and not just to try them out and to have ticked a box and said, yay, we've done that thing, but to really understand, did it work? Did it drive value? I think you'll find in a lot of the kind of the complex data, programmatic targeting things that sound really advanced and really high tech, often they don't drive that much more value compared to the costs and the complexity of them. Whereas there've been some new platforms, and the examples like TikTok and Spotify and platforms that really have emerged and seem to be sticking around and not going anywhere. So what is your approach to them? Do keep trying. And I think that helps spark that passion as well. People are passionate about trying new things and wanting to do new things. So keep those pilots going, but tie it all back to performance. At the end of the day, for us, it's a performance story. And I don't mean short-term performance media. I mean, we've driven this digital transformation, as I said at the start, not because we thought it was popular and cool and trendy to sort of be more digital, but because we genuinely thought that's what our consumers were doing. That's what we needed to do to take advantage of new opportunities. And throughout this journey, we've tried to measure that and prove that that's correct. Now, we're effectively a big FMCG company. We don't sell many of our products directly. We sell through third-party retailers rather than directly to our consumers. So we do have to rely quite a lot on what can be slow-moving and quite heavy lifting kind of measurement approaches, big analysis that sometimes takes a year to come through at the end of campaigns, and that still is important and a big anchor stone of what we ultimately look back on. But we have been evolving that and working with our insights team to say, if we're trying to test new things, if we're trying to be more agile, we need to be more agile in our measurement. So working towards more always on approaches to kind of our media measurements. We're doing a lot more sort of brand tracking and looking at how, by tracking the changes in perception towards our brand, we can spot both short-term and long-term brand benefits. And that's another key thing with this digital transformation. We've seen many companies can trip themselves up by, when they move into digital, their measurement becomes all about short-term measures. They want to measure the clicks and the performance that day, that week. And that can be a part of your story, but certainly if you're trying to build a brand, you have to make sure you still keep an eye on what's the longer term story. Where am I building a brand? Where is some of this stuff paying back in 6 months or a year's time? And digital has brought new ways of measuring, and we haven't been afraid to use those. Some of our partners have very clever ways of measuring, using club card data and other loyalty schemes to try and track sales. We've also really started embracing the possibilities that digital brings of being able to do geolocation. So being able to run certain campaigns in certain cities and not in other cities, and keeping everything else the same, to really start digging into what is driving performance for our business. So in a way, there's nothing there that's radical, that's brain surgery, that perhaps you wouldn't have thought of on your own. And many of those I'm sure you are driving across your own business. But I think there are pitfalls, and overall we think it's sort of a a different approach to some businesses have taken, and it avoids some of the lessons we've seen from our peers who perhaps, our new head of media joins us from Adidas, and Adidas had a lesson where they went too far down sort of the digital media, too far down this performance route, really had to take a step back. And so we think by kind of bringing our people together, by having a focus on digital transformation, but that's one that's based on doing the basics well and building up rather than chasing the shiny new objects, and really bringing a whole organization with you. It's no use if you have a digital and media team who's run miles ahead and is doing really exciting things, but your marketing team or your sales team is still lagging behind. You need to bring that whole organization with you. And yeah, so that's just a little bit of what we wanted to share to start your day today, to hopefully get you guys thinking about how you might continue to be driving your own transformations, or perhaps many of you might be further ahead than us, in which case we will continue trying to learn from what we see from you. But thanks for having me in to kick things off.
Thank you very much indeed, Jerry. Much appreciated, sir. It really is.